So you can clearly see I'll only do one area. So I'm going to cover. I'm going to do a first wash to set the base. Then you can grid to even out the amount of water on the wash. Once you've done that, you take the small brush. So if you do it on a quarter, you can use smaller brush sizes because you don't necessarily need to have. And there, hop. Let's move on. Some hair. Here we have the head. Here we have the body. And as you can see, it starts to diffuse by capillarity. The brush was wetter than what was on the paper. So it needs to be a quick gesture. That is, with 2 or 3 strokes, I drew the little cats. What you should avoid doing is going over it multiple times. That's why there should be a lot of pigments and a lot of water from the start, because anyway, it will lighten as it dries. So in the end, I could have even added more pigments. But the fact of coming back to it, continuing to rework that area, you risk the peripheral area drying out and the area inside drying out, which you continue to work on because you want it to be a bit darker. Risk of spreading. And when it spreads on a dry part, it may create a bit of a halo effect. So be careful about that. And then, if you want to add an ear, for example, you can take your brush loaded with pigment, dry it, and then try to add a little ear. Here you go. It's not essential, but there you go. So here what is important, and again I think my brush was a bit too wet. The important thing is that your brush should not be wet. And because if it's too wet, you will put water here and it will make the pigments spread here. So there you go. A bit for the demonstration. How you can create a small ball of fur. It's an exercise which is still quite technical, but is meant to be quite funny because we're more on exploration here. We're more on observing reactions. Wet on wet technique. So I think it's a really interesting exercise to do. Afterwards, you can test by adding a little more water. Much less water during the base. When painting the base of your watercolor, your first wash. And when you also use less water on the brush, more water on the brush, it will allow you to see as well. Here, what are the different reactions depending on the humidity present? In the first wash and the moisture on your brush, so it's also an excellent exercise for starting to understand the possibilities of the wet on wet technique.